This is our main base of operations here. And then here in a minute, we'll go by a grove that I just bought about 6 months ago from a family friend who is getting older and is looking to divest themselves of some of their properties, which I think is pretty important moving forward, that family farms make an effort at least to sell to other family farms to keep them more viable. We are in Lindsay, California, and this is the heart of the citrus belt in California, and this is some of the highest quality citrus fruit in the world comes from this area. So this is another block that we own, and this is the property I grew up on as a child. After my dad passed away, my mom really didn't have a lot of involvement in what was going on the farm, and you know, so she didn't understand a lot of how all this worked, and to be frankly honest, I didn't either. So, you know, one of the first things I did was, you know, basically make a list of all the things that I didn't know and learned as much as I could about them. I didn't like some of the answers I was finding, so it made me even more curious about, you know, how the inner workings of some of this go and what that means for the future of my family.
Production funding for American Grown, My Job Depends on Ag, provided by James G. Parker Insurance Associates, helping to protect and grow Valley agribusiness in California for over 40 years. By the Gar and Esther Titilian Charitable Foundation, a legacy of giving to support the people that make agriculture grow. Farms feed families, public television feeds minds. By Brent, Professional Agriculture, supporting the heroes that work hard to feed a hungry world every day. By Unwired Broadband, today's internet for rural Central California, keeping Valley agriculture connected since 2003. By Harris Farms, a tradition of working forward to protect the future of water, ranches, and farms in California and beyond. And by Valley Air Conditioning and Repair, family-owned for a half-century, dedicated to supporting Valley agriculture and the families that grow our nation's food.
Family farm, typically, if you say family farm, obviously, if you picture a father and son or father and daughter, or you would just consider that it's handed down from one generation to the next.
When you look at that definition of a family farmer, I think there's a lot of connotations to that. But I think, given my experience and given my observations of the different types of enterprises that are operating in the San Joaquin Valley, you really have to take a look at not so much their mission statements, but their exit strategies. And what I've been able to conclude is there are three types of family farmers operating in the central San Joaquin Valley today. And based upon their exit strategies, one form of family farmer is a hedge fund, high capital invested enterprise that is based on a certain percentage of growth with a date specific at some time in the future for those ag lands, and specifically the water to be monetized for a return on investment for the investors that put up the money to acquire the land and the water. A second type of family farmer would be what I'll call our grower, packer, shippers. And what's unique about those types of family farms is they tend to take advantage of economies of scale in terms of their in-house acreage that's affiliated to the processing facility. And then last, the other type of family farmer, or what most of us are familiar with, and those are the typical mother, father, son, multi-generation, multicultural producers that have from family to family to family focused primarily on production of raw food. And when you take into consideration all of the influences that are affecting the cost of those operations, you can see why each one of those three types of farmers have advantages and disadvantages in this current agricultural environment.
This particular area, the east side of the valley, was really designed and populated by family farms. During the drought, particularly here in Tulare County, if you didn't have access to good groundwater, since we were at a zero allocation on surface water, you weren't able to keep your trees alive unless you had the resources to pay. I think in 2015, we were paying about $1,200 an acre foot for any surface water that was available after the zero allocation. So if you didn't have the groundwater or the resources to acquire enough surface water, this is the result.
Farmer today is kind of a loosely defined term. You know, what is a farmer? And so, yeah, people can make the claims that they're a family farm, you know, but they're a ginormous hedge fund group and they have a family. Nothing to knock what they do, but there is a difference between what's going on and what we want the people to understand as far as generational family farms. We're at a crossroad in America where our society is been the wealthiest society. Our worry of food is almost vanished since the Great Depression. It's there, it's everywhere. And I think in some ways our society's devalued the worth of agriculture. And we've transitioned from valuing the people who grow our food to put more value on how cheap food can be, I guess, or how the distributors and the mechanisms that put the food in the grocery stores, the farmer kind of gets lost in a wash in all this. And to be successful, yes, you have to make a profit. And some of these regulations that have been put on the family farmer, they don't have the means to overcome some of these costs that the general public thinks may be good and well-intentioned, but they can be catastrophic as far as how they're going to, you know, continue to survive.
One of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest comments that comes up to the younger generation is, how do we deal with all the regulatory reporting that's required? I have a client that I'm representing today that received a letter from the Air Resources Board. This is a fifth-generation citrus producer that over the last 70 years has been successful in building an empire of over 1,500 acres. Over the course of that 50 years, this farming company has acquired over a fleet of over 15 to 20 heavy-duty trucks. These trucks could be dump trucks, they could be water trucks, but the main thing you need to understand is that these trucks may only be used 2-3 weeks out of a year, during harvest season, during spray season. So here's a family-based business that's acquired assets over the course of a lifetime, but because the Air Resources Board has determined that no vehicle should be using motors any older than 2010, this family farm has now been given a directive to go replace 10 trucks in 1 year, which causes them to have to go out and borrow $1 million to replace 10 trucks that they drive 1 week out of a year so that they can be a part of the solution to climate change for the rest of the world.
So this is a typical harvest of citrus. You got workers on ladders that climb up the tree with a bag, and you'll see them emptying it in the bin. This is difficult work. The weather's not too bad out today, but sometimes it can be pretty cold when they're out doing this, pretty warm. It's tough work. I like to come out when the harvest crews are here and really take a look at the fruit in the bin. It's a lot easier to see it together and see some of the problems that may be a little more difficult to see on the tree. So one of the reasons we top the trees is to balance the tree and its structure with the root zone. That way we can increase fruit set, we can increase size, quality, that sort of thing. The other thing we do it for is to help with integrated pest management. It helps keep some of the bug populations down. If you think about it, a 16 or a 20-foot tree is much harder to spray the top of the tree than a 12-foot or 11-foot tree. 11 feet is what the block we're cutting today. That's the height. The other reason we do it is from a labor standpoint. It can be unsafe for a picker to be on a ladder too high in the air, so we keep the trees cut down to a point to where they're able to get on a ladder and pick it without it being a safety concern.
I'm a fourth-generation agricultural professional, and what that means is that in the early 1960s, I was blessed to be born into a family of 3 brothers with a father who, along with 10 or 20 other pioneers, contributed to this wonderful bounty of agricultural capability in the Central Valley. My observations and experiences and conversations with many, many friends of mine that have been in the ag industry for most of their life basically come down to one concern. And the concern is, why are family farms vanishing from the Central San Joaquin Valley? People my age, people that are in their 50s and their 60s that basically took over the reins of their operations from their parents, are talking to their children about whether or not their children are willing to make the same kinds of sacrifices and the same commitments to carry on the family farm.
What you lose is a diversity in crops. You lose the diversity in crops because different family farms will grow what they want to grow and what works for them. If you have somebody, a big organization taking over thousands of acres and thousands of acres, they're not going to be all that diversified. Now, they may be vertically integrated versus a family farmer, but on the ground, with the crops, they're not going to be that diversified. That does open you up for food safety issues. It also lessens the diversification of what's availably grown in your country.
This valley here is special. It's very special. And I don't know if people really understand just how special it is, I mean, on this planet, what this little area can do. The family farmer has kind of, and a lot of my acquaintances around here have given up, almost given up the belief that their voice is being advocated for. It's money is root of all evil in a lot of ways, but the bigger corporations and the people who are picking and packing, and they got the labels on their stuff, they have a lot more resource to advocate to lobbyists, to politicians, that when something may be coming down the pike for as far as regulations are concerned, they put themselves in a position when the bills are written that they come out better. And for us, it's getting tough. We just feel like we have a voice.
Once one person controls the majority of supply, there becomes demand outpaces supply, because you can decide to sit on inventory and regulate supply and demand into the market. That's what I was telling Eric before. I said if he holds onto his citrus for about 2 more years, when SEGMA locks down, he's going to be selling oranges for $70 a box when he's never sold them for more than $40. because all of a sudden you're going to find a shift in the citrus market where all of a sudden nobody saw it. But isn't it surprising that 3 major citrus packers had the citrus industry cornered 2 years before it happened?
Yeah, if we can start on Monday, we'll get all this brush shredded and stuff.
Yeah.
I got brush everywhere.
Yeah, we'll just do it Monday.
Okay. So we contract with a packer who contracts the labor to come out and pick this. Okay. So the way that process works is this fruit will be harvested. The harvest crew will be paid through the packer. The fruit will be processed by the packer. And at a cost, their cost to do that, and then they will market and sell that. You know, one of the bigger issues is really the fact that family farmers are part of the community, and so the profits that are generated on a family farm generally stay within the community, versus you know, a different business model that says, okay, you know, we're landowners within a certain set of boundaries, and whatever profits we make, we're going to move out of that community. That's a big issue, particularly here in the Central Valley.
One of the most difficult conversations that I've had to have with my clients or my clients' children is what happens when they're approached by a representative from a RIT or one of these hedge fund organizations that makes him a cash offer of $25,000 to $30,000 an acre and says, let me take this responsibility off of your hands. I'll cash you out, I'll mitigate your tax liability for the next 15 to 20 years, and this piece of ground will go into our RIT. And the RIT, or the hedge fund, now acquires that parcel, takes it into part of a larger pool, which I said before has already been obligated for a date specific in the future to have that water monetized, which means that that ancestral agricultural land that has been producing food for more than 50 to 60 years has been removed from the system forever, and that we'll never again be able to share the bounty of nuts, fresh fruit, and those specialty crops that are unique to this Mediterranean climate ever again.
My name is Rick Schewel. I'm a partner in an agricultural real estate brokerage firm, Schewel and Associates Diversified Real Estate. Over the last 10 years, really since 2008, our company has seen a large transition, a real movement, if you will, of the family farm transitioning into a more corporate environment, albeit possibly through investment companies. Not a lot of foreign investment, but East Coast investment perhaps, some hedge fund, insurance companies, investment companies coming into our Central Valley and seeing the value of our location. And our family farms have seen opportunity to possibly exit what they had perceived as a lifelong occupation, and being faced with the facts that now may be the time to sell.
We've created an environment in California where the single greatest risk that an agricultural business can take is to give somebody a job. In the labor part of this thing, what I can tell you is we have created a nightmare in California where class action lawsuits and what are called Private Attorney General Act lawsuits are absolutely rampant. They are out of control, and it's just attorney profiteering. These are lawsuits where an attorney will accuse the business of some sort of technical violation of the labor code. We're getting a lot of them now for little errors on the check stubs, or you gave somebody, their time records show that they got a 29-minute lunch period instead of a 30-minute lunch period. Then they spiral these out over the number of employees and make crazy demands. It's become a form of legalized extortion. There's no insurance to cover it. And every single one of these lawsuits that I've done for almost 20 years ends exactly the same way. Some tiny amount of money goes to each worker, while the attorneys involved take away a 6 or 7 figure attorney fee. But when you're Walmart and you get hit with one of those things, you can absorb it. When you're a family dairy farm that's trying to cling to life with all these other regulatory pressures, and somebody tells you you have to settle a lawsuit for $300,000 or $400,000, or you're going to pay $300,000 or $400,000 in attorney's fees to defend yourself, how do you survive?
One thing about the politics in California is they become masters at putting you in a corner and making you choose bad or worse. Where you have a smaller family farm type operation and they're out there working 14, more than that, hours per day for 4 or 5 months a year at the very least, they're not going to get all the information that is going through trade organizations. You know, when trade organizations put their name on a piece of paper or a letter and send it to the legislature, that holds some power. There's backing behind that. But while all that stuff's going on, this guy's out here on a tractor. He's not finding out everything that's going on. He is trusting and giving that job to these representatives to deal with that. And it's not all the representatives' fault in these trade organizations. They too are being put into a position where they have to choose between bad or worse. And like I said, we've got to change the political future of this state. And we just need people who want things done, and we need people who put human beings as a priority.
Well, I think whether you are small or whether you are a large farming operation, you're having to deal with the increased amount of regulations that are placed upon you by both the state and the federal government. And we like to say it's a death by 1,000 paper cuts. The amount of regulations that growers have to comply with, have to stay on top of, add each and every day. And those regulations take away from the primary duties that farmers have, and that is to grow the food that people are consuming every day. That's why it's important for a trade association like us to be there to represent. As we say, we do collectively on your behalf what you cannot do individually. A trade association by its nature is voluntary. We're not a mandatory organization, so we don't compel a grower to pay. So a member can choose to be a member of ours or not be a member. A grower can choose to belong to us if we're doing the right and appropriate things, or choose to not be a part of us or not be a member of our organization if they don't believe in what we're doing. I grew up in a farming community, Fowler. We grew up on a vineyard that grew grapes that we made into raisins. Well, I come from a small farming background. We had 40 acres that we sharecropped of raisins, so I come from a small family farm background. I understand the issues and the plight of those who are small, those who are family farmers, to hold on to what they have. And I grew up in a community that was made up of small family farmers.
Decade after decade of family farmers accepting the lesser of two evils, paying this bill today, this bill tomorrow, this bill today, this bill tomorrow. They're at a point right now to where they're paying $200, $300, $400 an acre a year in addressing all of these environmental issues while they've been farming their entire life, and they don't understand why they are being victimized as the sole creators of climate change problems based upon the policies or based upon what they hear on the news or what's being taught in the schools, and they're confused. And they go to their trade associations, they go to the experts that they're paying fees and dues to communicate their message in Sacramento, and they get told just to write a check. It's a lesser of two evils. That we have a legislature that is comprised of progressives, that we can't communicate a message. And I'm sitting here asking myself, we've been growing food for over 100 years. What do you mean we can't communicate to these people?
The United States, the people in the country, first should know exactly where their food's coming from. They should know how much of it comes from here, from the Central Valley of California. And then they have to make a decision how important that is to them to have a homegrown food supply. Until they get involved and make that decision, within the state of California, this is going to continue.
Production funding for American Grown, My Job Depends on Ag. Provided by James G. Parker Insurance Associates. Helping to protect and grow Valley agribusiness in California for over 40 years. By the Gar and Esther Titillion Charitable Foundation, a legacy of giving to support the people that make agriculture grow. Farms feed families, public television feeds minds. By Brandt, Professional Agriculture, supporting the heroes that work hard to feed a hungry world every day. By Unwired Broadband, today's internet for rural Central California, keeping Valley agriculture connected since 2003. By Harris Farms, a tradition of working forward to protect the future of water, ranches, and farms in California and beyond. And by Valley Air Conditioning and Repair, family-owned for a half-century, dedicated to supporting Valley agriculture and the families that grow our nation's food.